Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another live stream. That's right, lots to be excited about, lots to review. So thank you guys and welcome. Uh, yeah, good to see everybody in chat. Um, Looks like we have almost 1,000 people standing by. That's awesome. That's so cool. Um, yeah, we're gonna give people a little bit of time to filter in before we start really getting into it. Um, yeah, so. Yeah, let me just doing what I always do, which is adjusting everything. Yeah, we've gotten a ton of there's a ton of stuff to take a look at today. Honestly, we've got we're gonna do the map updates, we're gonna do the news updates, we're gonna do look at some of the videos, try to read into some of the statements that the leadership of these Russia, the U.S., Ukraine have been making. We're going to try to tease out some of the realities there about what's really going on, what's really happening. So, yeah, been certainly a very, very interesting couple of days for sure. For sure. I don't know. We'll give people a little bit of time to get into it. Yeah, did just want to, recognize I see some of the channel members in here dropping all of the exclusive emojis the channel members get. Yeah, I appreciate all you guys, honestly. And always interesting to see in the US here. This is actually a long weekend for us. I know we've got a lot of international people. It's our 4th of July weekend, our Independence Day. So we are, most people are off. At least have a 4-day. So, hopefully some of you US viewers are on vacation. Chris Jacobs, thank you. Converting the CAD to USD, of course. Can always count on Canadian money. I don't know what even color it is. Are they greenbacks, bluebacks? I don't know what you call Canadian money. Maple dollars. But thank you. Civil Defense UK contributing to the 4th of July beer fund. Thank you. I appreciate you guys. Okay, what do you guys say? We've got 2,000 people in here. Let's get into it. Let's talk about some stuff. Okay. Let me just so I did want to shout out, at least before we get too far into it, combatvetnews.com. It is the best way to support the channel, honestly, simply because I run the site soup to nuts. Patreon doesn't like my war content. YouTube definitely doesn't like any sort of war analysis. Obviously, they're fine with the maps and stuff, but anything with basically anybody in a uniform and a weapon is going to get demonetized. So I made Combat Vet News. It's got all the news about the national security space that you need, updated daily, all my YouTube videos for free. If you become a member, any one of those tiers is going to get you access to an exclusive room on the Discord, the members only content, which we just dropped a video on 2 days ago. Guys, it is the absolute wildest and most like disturbing minefield video I've ever seen. It is honestly kind of heartbreaking to watch these Ukrainian troops with who are struggling in their minefield, trying to get out. But it is, you can see when I talk about Russia's mine and mine clearing, why they're so dangerous. You see in real time just how tough it can be to navigate these minefields. Without clearing them first. It's so difficult. It's such a hard problem to crack, and it makes you understand why we're seeing 200-300 meters of advance a day from Ukraine. Thanks, Jacob Andrew. Yeah, Russia constantly stretching the definition of what is a military target. And it's hard to know with some of Russia's strikes if they are being deliberate and targeting civilian infrastructure or if they are just so inaccurate in their targeting that they end up hitting civilian infrastructure. Again, you think about like a an aid warehouse. Russia may observe people coming and going. They may observe trucks. They may say, we've seen trucks. We've seen a high volume of people. Trucks arrive empty and leave full. It must be a military supply warehouse. Yeah, Duncano23. Yeah, he said the video is something you can't unsee. It makes you understand just how hard it is. And, the reality is that I try really hard not to have graphic videos for graphic videos' sake, but a lot of people are passing judgment, I think, on the Ukrainian counteroffensive. And I am a little bit too, but it's important to recognize the difference between what I think is a plan that the high level planners could have done better and the hard, difficult, challenging work that these soldiers on the ground are fighting through. Misha Nance asked about a fundraiser. Believe it or not, guys, in the next month, we are going to roll out a way. So for legal reasons, I don't think as a U.S. citizen it's not clear that I can raise money for a foreign military, but for humanitarian causes and especially like displaced civilians. Yeah, in the next month, we're going to find a way, hopefully, to raise a significant amount of funds for displaced Ukrainian civilians. Anyway, let's talk about the updates, huh? That's what you guys are really here for. Let's do it. Okay. All right. So this is the control map. As always, guys, they just updated, actually, just a couple hours ago. And they, interesting, updated the front lines near Klachivka and Kurdyomivka, which apparently there's been that the map delayed. They say updated due to safety. I think they mean operational security, not to reveal operations of Ukrainian forces. But we can see, let's take a look. Let's see what we can see here. It's actually kind of hard to see. Kurdyomivka. Maybe they are marking this as liberated instead of, because this is listed as contested and now it's listed as officially liberated. Okay, so they meant as a margin of safety. Also outside of Klachivka, you can see Ukrainian forces, again, they're making some advances. They're pushing through here and, taking, again, this narrow strip of windbreak. You guys, as we talked about, these narrow areas, they are some of the most contested. These are the defensive positions, right? You can't, imagine if you were in a trench out in the open, you would just get picked apart. So I think they are trying to advance, again, the contested stuff is these forested windbreaks. And this is tough because this is also, as we talked about, canalizing Ukrainian forces in this case, and Russian forces when they're on the offensive. But that they're not going to advance from the open, so they have to advance through this narrow strip. And imagine if you're a Russian artillery crew, you just plot here, 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 and you walk the fires down. It's really hard. It's almost harder to fight in these tiny, narrow spaces because it's a little bit like the old, stories of like the Battle of Thermopylae, right? Where 300 people can hold off a larger army if they engage in a smart level of canalization. So just sort of a perspective on just how tough it can be sometimes. Like you have all these troops, but at the end of the day, how many troops, if you can only comfortably and safely get a few hundred or a few dozen into some of these little narrow strips, then like ultimately that's all you can fight with. And so I think this is part of Russia's defensive idea, is to create basically a bunch of little battles of Thermopylae where Ukraine's superiority and like broad firepower can't necessarily come to play quite like they want it to. Now let's take a look at the combat map. As you guys can see, there's not really been any reported Ukrainian offensive work in the last 24 hours. Russia continuing to engage in a level of counterattacking, notably including near this Rivnopol. But really, you're seeing, again, mostly fighting around Avdiivka and lightly around Bakhmut. Again, these are like counterattacking efforts. But I want to point out that there's a lot of inaccuracy, or sorry, I'm calling it inaccuracy, differences between these maps. You see here, like the Burkiva Reservoir, right? This depicts Ukraine as controlling a broad swath and the entirety of the Burkiva Reservoir. The live map, let's see if we can get this up real quick, depicts the Burkiva Reservoir as being much more narrowly contested. So here's the reservoir itself, right? So this shows that Burkiva is not Ukrainian held, and actually that Russia has been making advances in the last couple days, and that this is actually, I mean, just look at the difference here in how both of them are representing basically the same reservoir of territory. It's pretty much the same, but if you're a commander, or if you've ever done any tactical command, you know that the difference between this and this, like in terms of what you have to work with, are massive, like really massive. Right here, you have the reservoir at your back. It's kind of an obstacle. It hurts your ability to bring forces to bear, but it also hinders the enemy because they have this swampland to contest with. You have a whole bunch of these forested regions that can serve on your defense. And of course, this depicts you as controlling a lot more. In contrast, right, this depicts a lot less. And I think the reality is probably a little bit messier in between. I think this is probably areas that are confirmed as liberated by Ukraine, and that the rest of this is considered contested push and pull kind of areas. Stefan, thank you. Any thoughts on the CV90? I don't actually know what the CV90 is. It's not one of those, it's one of the Swedish combat vehicles. I actually don't know anything about its stats or anything. But we could take a look real quick. CV90, Swedish tracked armored combat vehicles. I guess not a tank. This looks like an autocannon. So probably looks like maybe a Bradley, like their answer to the Bradley. But it's built in 94 by BAE. Yeah, here's a variant. Again, so I look at this, I think sort of this is maybe either a Bradley or a multi-purpose chassis. So let's see if we can say what it does, like its actual role on the battlefield. Nope, continuously evolved, advances battlefield requirements. Oh, okay, the Swedish version of the main infantry fighting vehicle, but it sounds like there's also okay, variants for forward observation, command and control, armored recovery, electronic warfare, and so forth. 17 variants. Whew. So yeah, this is very Swedish, right? You have one chassis and then you put in variants of it, which for a country like Sweden that can't manage 100 different logistics chains or 1,000 different logistics chains, having one logistics chain, one set of parts, one set of sprockets and widgets and oil filters can really, really improve the ultimate deliverability. And it can improve your logistics a lot. So fundamentally, I think based on that, if that is indeed the mentality of have one chassis, one frame, and build sort of your different vehicles from it, if I was Ukraine, I would be like, okay, the chassis' best asset is its ability to be smooth out the logistics process. But if it's one of 15 IFVs that you're fielding, then it's not smoothing any logistics at all. It's just another complicator to the logistic system. I'm sure it's great because the Swedish, they design weapons well. BAE Systems is no joke. They win a lot of contracts for U.S. military equipment, so I'm sure its quality is outstanding. But outstanding quality and complicated logistics could sometimes cancel each other out. Thanks, Noah Berman. I appreciate it. Okay, so let's get back to the combat map here. One of the things that I thought was interesting, and we'll take a look from War Mapper, who's got a little bit more detail. This is actually what they are reporting as being Russia, as sort of the Bakhmut line. And you can see since June 8th, so in the last month-ish, a little less than a month, beige is area retaken by Ukraine. Again, very marginal progress. This gray zone is listed as contested, which is sort of fascinating. I'm always fascinated when you have these weird salients of contested area, but you can see a lot more of this is reported as contested. War Mappers actually arguing that the entire north bank of the Burkiva Reservoir is held by Russia. But you can see just how much of this region is listed as contested. And, I think there's really a lesson here as I've talked about in other videos. Oh, thanks, Duncanu. Appreciate it. One of the things I've talked about in other videos is that, this actually is following an extremely World War I type of trajectory. In the first 12 weeks or so of the First World War, there were massive changes in territory. I wonder if I can find a time lapse of the front in World War One. Time lapse World War One. Okay, so here is a World War One everyday time lapse. Let me just see. All right, I don't care about this. Yes, I do care about this. Okay, perfect. All right, so I want you guys to watch this time lapse with me of World War One, and I want to point out it's day. One day is a day. So you can see right here, it's been 3 or 4 days, and the battle lines are being drawn, right? And then look what happens right here. Watch the front lines. Again, remember the front lines are happening here and here on either side of Germany and Austro-Hungary. Look at this progress, right? And then look. You got a bunch of progress on the Eastern Front, and then the progress slows a little, and then it starts to slow a lot. Look at this. Months and months and months and months. Minimal changes. Hardly anything. A little bit of contested areas around Turkey. All right, we're in 1915 now. You notice it's been almost a year. Whatever changes have happened, there's none on the map. They're not even depicted. We're into 1915. You can see a small offensive pushing a little to the north. And you can see no changes, no changes, no changes, no changes. Look at this. We're into April 1915. No movement. A little bit of movement, right? You can see in and around these Middle Eastern regions. They have to zoom in just to show that there is fighting happening. There is changes to territory. You can see a little bit of fighting happening here and here. Right? But you guys see how this is remember, this is a grueling, brutal war. And just look at how, and remember, this is all Western Front stuff. The Eastern Front hasn't changed at all. Or, yeah. To Germany, this was referred to as Eastern Front, Western Front. Right? Look at this, just absolutely. And they're really, you can see this here, 1915, you're starting to see Russian internal conflicts start to reflect some significant progress, right? But I want to point out again what's happening in the East. Virtually nothing. You see we're into November 1915. You can see there's some dynamics happening in the Balkans, but just look at the tremendous lack of activity, especially in some of these front lines. right? We're into 1916 now. And you can see that other than within the Balkans, where there's just tiny incremental progress, and then long periods of very little activity. March, April, right? June, you can see again some movements in Turkey and in in what was then Palestine. But just for weeks, very little happening. You can see some countries beginning to become neutral, pull out of treaties. You can see Russia making some level of counterattack. But look at just like day by day by day. What I want you guys to take away from this is the incredibly slow pace of warfare. And I want you to contrast that pace against the onset of the war, right? Look at the first 2 weeks. Boom, 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 boom. They are really significant changes. I mean, especially this week here. Look at this final early September, right? Look at September 1914. You can see, right, this huge push and then a dynamic counteroffensive. And then basically 90% of the end state of this conflict in the East in the West has been locked in. 90% of it. And hundreds of thousands of casualties. And the reason I want you guys to see this map is to understand that my worry is that this is what is happening here, right? That we've had a huge push, a huge counter push, and then slowly both sides get better at defending using all the defensive technologies at their disposal, like mines, intelligent artillery, drone reconnaissance, to really make large-scale offensives vastly more punitive than defensive operations. And once you come to that realization, it can be very, very difficult to break that. It requires a really game-changing piece of technology, historically, a game-changing piece of technology combined with a novel tactic. And the problem is militaries are institutions, and the people who sit at the top of institutions are older and more experienced and versed in that institution's operations. So if you are someone, again, imagine you're a French general in the First World War. You came of age in the era where bright blue uniforms marched against dark blue or red uniforms and shot at each other from formation with muskets. So even though technology changes, ultimately you can't conceive of a warfare that isn't soldiers marching. And the only way things changed is for all of that old style of thinking, and this is all bureaucracies, that old style of thinking had to be proven definitively to be utterly trash, to be totally a worthless way to fight a war. And my fear is that now, like in World War I, you're fighting. My fear is that Ukraine is equipped and trained to fight a war in 1991, right? They're trained to beat the Iraqi army in 91 and in 2003, right? Air-land battle, breakthrough, dynamic combat. And the problem that they haven't understood is that defensive technologies, and again, I think the linchpin of this is advances in how mines are deployed and how mines are employed. Scatterable mines via missiles and artillery, employed as canalization, combining the canalization effect of mines, forcing people into narrow spaces, and then using drones and smart artillery to punish them with precision. That's how the Ukrainians defended Volodar, right? I mean, look, Volodar should be a comically easy target to take out, and entire Russian brigades were wiped out and reconstituted in the effort. So I say that because there has to be some sort of fundamental technological change. I worry that both sides, like World War I, are learning at a steep cost. And they're learning that they can use defensive technologies better than offensive technologies, and that we're going to have to do some serious homework to come up with a way to solve these problems. Just like in the First World War, they had to invent things like tanks, things like effective combat aircraft. They had to develop motorized, basically they had to invent motorized and mechanized warfare in order to break the stalemate of defense caused by the First World War. So you had to use aircraft and airborne troops, the idea that you could jump troops over a line. I mean, think about how utterly mad that must have sounded to, a U.S. general. I mean, imagine it's 1925. You are a general who served in the First World War. You served in the Mexican-American War, the Spanish-American War, and you are told that someone's going to take this thing that was invented 20 years ago, an aircraft. You're going to load thousands of troops into it, and you're going to have them jump out and land behind enemy defense works. And you're like, if you could do it, great, but that sounds like madness. It must have sounded completely insane. But if you were in World War II, those generals had to come to the realization that they had to find something better. There had to be something better, and they had to find new ways to combine and use their technology. And that's a big part of it, right? The drop of airborne troops, the use of motorized and mechanized troops to rapidly deploy across the battlefield, breaking into enemy lines, relieving those troops, and creating chaos among the static troops. But it required things like portable radios, the ability to have those troops behind the lines communicate with their higher headquarters. You had to use the innovation of aircraft, right? Real combat aircraft that could really deploy airborne troops. You had to invent parachutes. You had to invent tanks and the subsequent logistics systems to maintain a tank through kilometers and kilometers and kilometers of combat. So what's it going to look like in the future? I mean, your guess is kind of as good as mine, but I suspect that it's going to involve something combining drones and robotics and some sort of smart AI, right? I maintain that if you wanted to counter IEDs or mines effectively, instead of having U.S. troops drive over them, another method may be to have some sort of AI trained to learn, detect, and assess, and even just mark mines and other planted explosives. I think that's what it's going to look like, right? Innovations in demining and detection. Yeah, I think also probably, again, drones, like a lot more drones, a lot more AI is going to have to operate at scale to help break up some of these powerful defensive forces. Josh Bradbury, thank you. They're asking, can they use Reapers to take out artillery piece and go in? See, that's one of the problems, is that Reapers, this is actually a great illustration of what I talked about, right? Think about what a Reaper is. It is a single mission aircraft, right? You put some Hellfires on it, you fly it, but ultimately, in terms of the battlefield, the generals that make the Reapers, they can only conceive of them as being aircraft because they're air generals, right? They're from the Bosnia era. And so they think aircraft is just they fly overhead, they look for a target, they find it, they shoot, they strike it with a weapon. And that is hard to scale, right? You have to land it again. It's very expensive. It's just really tough to scale. And remember, you have to find all this artillery. And so what you would need to do is find ways to accelerate the ability to identify enemy artillery, accelerate the ability to fix its location, accelerate the ability to get a drone to get on target, and do so with less humans in the cycle. Not no humans in the cycle, but you need to be able to iterate that so that you can take out, tens of artillery pieces a day. And right now it's like 1 or 2. You have to escalate it, right? If Russia can field 1,500 or 3,000 independent artillery pieces, you can't take them out one at a time. You have to find a way to take them out at an industrial scale. And the only answer is to, just like it's not going to be any different than the future of like every influencer talks about AI. AI is going to change the game for sales. And it's kind of true, right? If you have AI, message every homeowner in your neighborhood and just be like, are you interested in selling your house? And as soon as there's a response, then you cycle it up to a human. It's not any different, right? When you have AI doing some of the most tedious, hardest parts, and I'm using the word AI, but I mean a system that combines a basic level of artificial intelligence, a basic level of robotics, a basic level of drones, and some sort of image processing or recognition, and you do so in a way that's scalable. That's when I think you're going to see. That's what I think is going to be the thing that breaks this, right? A cheap drone, some sort of system capable of identifying targets and targeting them at scale. Again, somewhere in the process would be a human, but it's vastly different. Again, imagine how much more you could do if you were like, a human being has to do the math, review the photographs, decide, yes, this is an artillery piece, and we have to like put it into the battlefield. Again, I'm not talking, people are like, oh, you're talking about Skynet, or it's not quite. It doesn't need to be advanced. I'm not talking about a general AI. I'm talking about a narrow AI, something that is capable of just doing something 80% as effective as a human being, right? So like clearing mines is a classic one. A human being can do it pretty good. But if you could just get a machine that just walks up and down a field looking for pieces of metal that it thinks sort of fit the parameters-ish of being a mine. And then it just sits on top of them and goes, I found one, does a little squat, takes out the mine, and then the next robot goes in, right? It has a little Bluetooth connection to a laptop with a GPU that does the processing. It's trained on a bazillion magnetic and thermal and images of mines, and it just goes, this is a mine, this isn't. And you tell it, hey, clear me a 6 meter wide path right through this field, 6 meters by 100 meters, go. Like, yeah. WPM, the old paperclip maximizer, exactly. All right, people talk about FLIR, radar, air power. Right, it's all got to come together in a smarter, faster way. It's too slow. Right, you have to. The problem is not. Yeah, Strunch, cloud-based deminers, sort of, exactly. Yeah. Right, some sort of evaluation. And again, you can sit there and people are like, oh, it's killer robots. Like, you can install a human failsafe, right? The human failsafe can be, hey, 2 seconds before authorizing a mine kill, the robot transmits 360 images around and a picture of the mine, and it just verifies. Just to make sure that, hey, there's no kids around. You're not accidentally you didn't go rogue, like you didn't get confused and you're going to try to demine an ammo depot. There's a lot of those, a human being as a final failsafe. But right now, a human being clearing a mine has to pick up a magnetic thing, walk along the road doing this. And when they find one, they have to call EOD, or they have to blow in place. They have to mark it somehow. It's so tedious, right? As opposed to sitting at a laptop and being like, you get a little notification, you open it up, goes, is this a mine? Yes. Is it safe? Yes. Kill mine. Okay. Again, is it a mine? Is it safe? Yes. You do that and you're hours. You've cleared a minefield in 60 minutes instead of 6 hours. But again, this is speculative, right? I'm sure everybody has a good idea. Can you make it happen? There's a lot of money in whoever can build this thing. Here's the thing. Even if the military doesn't want it, guess what? There's still going to be a lot of mines floating around Ukraine. A lot of mines. Yeah, as Death points out, you can just use an earth clearing machine. Yeah, the hard part is doing it under fire. The hard part is doing it fast and in a combat zone, right? So you can't really bring out a big earth clearing machine because if it gets damaged, right? Remember, if your earth clearing machine gets damaged, you got to get a new one. Whereas if especially if you're talking about a software program that's pre-chain, yeah. If you've got these sort of like if you're talking about software, right? That's the nice thing is that, I can destroy my hard drive with a hammer, but it won't impact. Not only will it not impact Adobe, right, as a company, or the Adobe Adobe Premiere Pro, the software. It also won't even. I also won't even necessarily remove my data, right? A lot of my data is stored on different clouds. Okay, let's talk a little bit. Let's talk. You guys want to check out some videos? I feel like we should check out some videos. Okay. Let's all right, so there's a couple here that I wanted to talk about. One, we're going to try to we're going to look at some of the statements from both the US and from Russia over the last couple of days about this Wagner coup. The fallout is still happening, and it's pretty interesting to see how both sides are trying to play and spin this. So let's get into it.
Good direct.
So this is from Reuters. It's the U.S. says it told Russia it wasn't involved with the Wagner coup. I want to point out this is Jack Kirby. He's the national security spokesperson for the United States.
Direct communications with the Russians. We had good direct communications with the Russians over the course of the weekend. It's our expectation that that would be able to continue going forward. Regime change is not our policy. We've been very, very clear about that. What we're focused on is making sure Ukraine can succeed on the battlefield.
Okay. Some of these statements are weird. I also don't like when they cut them together because it removes a lot of context. But regime change is not our policy is a far cry from we didn't have anything to do with the coup.
Stay focused on the group. Of course, we have to. They do operate outside of Ukraine, and we have levied lots of sanctions against them, and we'll continue to hold them accountable as appropriate. We had good direct communications with the Russians over the course of the weekend. It's our expectation that that would be able to continue going forward. Regime change is not our policy.
Okay, this sort of annoys me because if you know political speak, you know this is not what he says. So if he says we've had direct communication with the Kremlin and he says regime change is not our policy, that is not the same thing as saying you aren't involved with the Wagner coup. Now, does this mean they were? No. But the U.S. may just want to keep Russia on its toes. They may not want Russia to know necessarily that what it does, who it does and doesn't have influence over. That's not a bad move. It's not a bad play. But what sort of irks me a little is that saying you're not involved, right, is like saying you're not involved with the Ukraine conflict. The U.S. is not a belligerent in the Ukraine conflict, but it is not involved. Now, I've seen zero evidence the U.S. was involved in any way with this Wagner Group coup. It would be easy if we just said that. But we haven't said that, have we?
Let's see if Ukraine, and we have levied lots of...
And they're talking, okay, we sanctioned the Wagner Group. They operate outside the U.S. We're aware of them. Absolutely. All true. Again, I have a certain level of skepticism because because of some of those statements about Prigozhin choosing to allegedly offering to, what was it? It was something like he was going to offer Ukraine. He was going to offer to like turn over, like withdraw from Bakhmut in exchange for something. It was weird. I don't know if it was true, excuse me. But I maintain that trying to read into, like, if you read carefully into political doublespeak, you realize just how little is often said. So this one's called Wagner Mutiny, Putin to investigate mercenary bosses' finances. Here's what's interesting is we can see here, it comes to us from it comes from obviously the Russian state, Reuters, the Reuters Russia press pool, and Concord Press Service. And Concord Press Service is actually Prigozhin's press service, the press service of the Wagner Group.
Russian President Vladimir Putin says that the finances of a catering company owned by Yevgeny Prigozhin, the Russian mercenary boss, are being placed under investigation. In the wake of the attempted mutiny by Prigozhin and his fighters over the weekend that shook that country.
Yeah, this is something you have to expect is going to happen. Obviously, if you think you can try to coup a country and then win contracts with said country, you've got another thing coming. It's not going to work. But does that mean Prigozhin will lose some of his largest sources of income? That remains to be seen. The answer seems like probably. Probably. Because he's so tied with the Russian state, it seems like primarily what he does is win Russian state government contracts.
It comes as Russian media are reporting that authorities have dropped a criminal case against the mercenaries in Wagner Group, apparently upholding one of the conditions of the deal that ended the revolt. On Tuesday, however, Putin announced that Wagner and Prigozhin, its founder, had received about $2 billion from the government in the last year, that the group...
So this, I think, is one of the threads that that I think Putin is trying to walk. I still maintain that there was more to the deal than was publicly disclosed. Right? That's not a controversial statement. There was some backroom bullet points to this deal. But on the surface, if Putin's going to remain in power, he needs to look like he is cracking down. And so what he's done is taken a number of actions that are in line with appearing to have cracked down. The first is that he has gone out in public and he has, claimed victory, claimed that Prigozhin recognized the error of his ways and left on more or less of his own accord through a deal brokered by Lukashenko. But more importantly, right, Prigozhin appeared to have lost, right? He turned around. His forces are going to Belarus. It looks as though he's lost. This is important to preserve Putin's strength if ultimately the agreement involved Putin remaining in power. Here's where things get interesting. Putin has begun to purge his armed forces, both of people believed to be Wagnerites, notably General Sordovikin. And General Sordovikin is an interesting because he's a Wagner-affiliated general in the Russian Ministry of Defense. But early in the coup attempt, he very prominently came out and told Prigozhin, you should turn around. You should not do this. So in this purge of pro-Wagner officers or officers who Putin or the Kremlin deemed to have been indifferent in response to this coup attempt, not sufficiently loyal to the Kremlin, there's been a big purge. But the purge is also included. Indifference is a pretty tough charge to make, since, again, in Russian military culture, you don't do anything until you receive orders. And so if you didn't get explicit orders, almost everyone is guilty of indifference simply by existing in the Russian military as a soldier. So some of the people that have been getting rolled up for indifference are people that Prigozhin absolutely hates. Gerasimov is a good example, who's been relieved of basically all command authority. Which is weird, because not only is Gerasimov is someone who Prigozhin by name said he wanted out of the MOD. Kind of weird that they argue that Gerasimov was a little too pro-Wagner, despite the fact that the coup attempt literally was explicitly targeting him. I say all these things because you should understand that there's a lot of smoke and mirrors that occur as part of this. Right? And part of this, too, is that, they have to, again, explicitly drop charges against Prigozhin and Wagner, likely to, allow him to re-enter Russia and allow him probably, I suspect, to hold office. But you also have them at the same time investigating the finances of the Concord group. And that would help Putin look like he is doing the right thing. Does that make sense? Like he's doing the power, he is reasserting his strongman power.
The group had been fully financed by the state. About $1 billion went to Wagner from the Defense Ministry. In addition, just under $1 billion went to the catering company called Concord from food contracts with the Russian army. In this meeting with army troops at the Kremlin, Putin is saying that he hopes no one stole anything, but that it will be investigated. Earlier,
Interesting. Again, this is different because some of the translations indicate that Putin, believes that there was fraud and disservice and misappropriation, which itself is, again, very, very interesting to me. And it's almost certainly true, right? Like, listen, Lockheed Martin stock, if you own Lockheed Martin stock, you're siphoning U.S. tax dollars, okay? Their profits exceed analyst expectations because they're extracting more money from the U.S. taxpayer. So if you are an authoritarian, you understand that even if you follow the letter of these contracts, you can still get accused of like excessive profiteering. So it's tough to know. Is it like the answer is if you own the company that gets these lucrative contracts with large margins of profit and you're Prigozhin and you obviously own yachts, you finance a private army, you're talking about a massive, massive amount of financing, a massive amount of grift profit margin.
Told a crowd of 2,500 security personnel at a ceremony there that they'd stopped civil war from starting. Putin doesn't mention Prigozhin by name, who's reportedly now in Belarus beginning his exile after the incident, according to its president, Alexander Lukashenko. Lukashenko is said to have brokered the deal that ended the crisis. On Tuesday, he said that he warned Prigozhin that Russian forces would, quote, squash him like a bug if the mutiny had carried on.
Yeah, this is, it remains to be seen. There's a lot of rumors, a lot of things leaked to press services. So again, I am very skeptical. But he goes and held a lot of the cards. And remember, even if you're like, Prigozhin wouldn't have won, he was outside Moscow. And the threat of turning Moscow into Bakhmut, which Prigozhin absolutely could have credibly done, that is a strong negotiating position. Like, holding the capital hostage is a strong negotiating position. So even if you believe you would ultimately lose, but your opponent would lose, it would be a Pyrrhic victory, that's a big position to negotiate from. And so therefore, given that, you should infer that this deal that Prigozhin struck would put him in a net gain of position for having taken the gambit, right? If his forces were militarily defeated in Rostov-on-Don, then he would take just about any deal he could get. But I'm pretty confident that the deal, when it ends, is going to give Prigozhin a net gain in wealth, power, or both. No, you see, people are like, no, 8,000 Wagner troops taking Moscow. No. Remember, all they would do is occupy Moscow, which they could absolutely do, or a substantial number of the neighborhoods within Moscow, and fight on the defensive like they had fought in Bakhmut. That is the ultimate problem. And remember, because Russia could not spare. Could they spare 8,000 troops off the front lines? Maybe not, guys. If they spared 8,000 troops, could they spare 8,000 troops, two brigades worth of equipment? And remember, 8,000 troops on the defensive would require about 20,000 to dislodge, plus or minus a little bit. And what are they going to do? What was Russia going to do? Encircle Moscow and starve the entirety of Moscow's population? Like, no, of course not. It was an absolute nightmare situation. Yeah. It's a powerful threat. It's enough of a threat that I believe he would negotiate to a net gain of position. Okay, guys. Do you want to look at some training photos? Let's look at some training footage, because I think this stuff is interesting. First off, we've got some footage released of new Ukrainian recruits carrying out close quarter drills. So let's take a look at it. It's training footage, YouTube. It's training footage. None of this has been combat footage. Don't demonetize me, please. But let's take a look. This is new Ukrainian recruits carry out close quarter combat drills. And actually, before we kick into this too much, we have a ton of new people who've just shown up. And so I did want to shout out two things. First is combatvetnews.com. And you guys know YouTube cannot stand. It hates, truly, anything resembling war content. Basically, if anyone has a uniform and a weapon, YouTube demonetizes it. Patreon also doesn't want it. But I believe that this news is important. And covering this story the right way is important. So if you want to support what I do, if you believe in this mission that I have, you can support on combatvetnews.com by becoming a member. It's the best way because I run the site, right? You're not paying Patreon. You're not paying YouTube. You're supporting me directly. Any one of these tiers gets you access to an exclusive members-only room on the Discord, and more importantly, members-only content. Twice a week, I drop a video of analyzing the viral footage the viral combat footage of that week. Last week we had a video that's honestly tough to watch, but it shows us just how devastating Russian mining operations are, how effective these simple minefields are at slowing Ukrainian advances to a crawl. It's really makes you appreciate the challenge that the Ukrainian armed forces are up against. So if you're interested, please, combatvetnews.com, members only. Thank you guys so much. The other one I wanted to talk about is the Strategic Sitrep. This is my newsletter I launched because so much of the national security stuff is the national security space in terms of news is absolutely clickbait. They don't divorce the stories from context. They report them as being grossly exaggerated, and often they ignore really important stories to national security and geopolitics. So I created a newsletter that's a simple few hundred-word summary of the most relevant national security stories of the week. And we give you a so what. We give you the context, the understanding of why this matters. So if you're interested, sign up. The link's there in the description as well as in the chat. and we'll probably pin it in a comment here. So thank you guys as always for your support. I really appreciate you. Okay. Jacob Andrew, thanks. It's sad people say Wagner didn't have enough men. It's a different story when you are the one sent to defend Moscow against them. It's true. Again, people assume you need enough soldiers to win. You don't. You need enough soldiers to hold the city hostage. And that is not a lot. It's way less than you think. I mean, here, let me look at some stats, right? Let's see. So, the Moscow Police Department, let's see if we can find how many people. Moscow Police Department. Oh, sorry. This is Moscow, like Idaho, which has like 37 police. Police of Russia Internal Affairs is really the most. Okay. So in the whole country, it says there's around 76,000. But again, if you're talking about Russia, 80 units, signed decree increasing the number of police officers. In the whole country, they have about 1 million, right? So 8,000 is probably at least competitive with the number of total police officers who are controlling and policing the city of Moscow. You know what I mean? So like 8,000. Let's ask it a different way, right? How big a city could 8,000 police control? So, how many police officers does a city need? This I'm curious, right? And we can I'm using police as a proxy for effective military control, right? So here we go. Nibosh, thank you. And also thank you to Custard. Yeah, and that's what we're here to do. I'm here to give my best analysis. Sometimes I'm right, sometimes I'm wrong. I try to be more right than wrong, but okay. Average officers per 10K. Okay, so let's say, right, you can see 15 seems to be the low end. So, all right, let's see if we can run some math real quick. 15 officers per 10,000. So 8,000 Wagnerites, which is a low ball, by the way, divided by 15. I think he probably had more. 533 sets of 8 times. That's per 10K, meaning they could control a city of 5.3 million people if they were a police force, right? Yeah, people are like mad, but remember, don't think of Wagner's threat as taking over Moscow. The threat was making Moscow a war zone in the middle, while like imagine if 8,000 heavily armed soldiers were to say, "Hey, we're going to seize the Pentagon." Like and the greater DC area. How long would it take to marshal the forces, create the plan, clear them out? Remember, they're heavily armed, combat tested. You're talking about basically you'd have to mobilize huge portions of the National Guard. You'd have to get them lethal weapons. You would have to just dislodge these troops from every city. They would mine it. They would have IEDs. They would have civilians everywhere. So you couldn't use your combat aircraft. You couldn't use your heavy artillery. You'd have to just house by house. All right. So that's what I'm arguing. And that's a powerful threat. That is a powerful threat to make to a country. We will turn your capital into a war zone. Or rather, we will force you to turn your capital into a war zone. It's a big threat. And I think it paid off for him. All right, let's talk. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the other thing that's happening. This is from the Russian MOD. It's training footage, YouTube. It's training footage. The Russian MOD also has a problem on their hands in that they, the state, were also humiliated by the Wagner coup. So they need to triple down on proving to the public in whatever cringy ways they can that they are actually effective, that they are really capable of stopping a threat to the country. Because that's a pretty big and embarrassing exposure of the state, right? You live in an authoritarian state. You expect that in exchange for having limited freedom of speech and limited freedom of movement and a fairly corrupt state apparatus, that they're at least strong, right? That's the whole point of authoritarianism. It's strong. And so if it's not that either, then you're like, what on earth is this state doing? So let's see how they're trying to put a Band-Aid on their reputation with some very public propaganda counter-saboteur training. So again, you can see this is almost universal, the armband reflecting military police. Now, military police have different roles in different countries. If you look, for example, at a country like Brazil, their military police are absolutely an essential law enforcement arm. They are the elite federal law enforcement that oftentimes go into places like favelas, and they're the ones who like get into gunfights with the like heavily armed drug dealers. The Italian Carabinieri are another example of like a military police affiliated organization. In the United States, military police are a little different. I was an officer in the military police. They have sort of dual roles in overseas. In a very conventional war, military police are often responsible for securing things like different rear areas, logistics lines. We also do a lot of traffic management, like sorting out who's going where. But a huge one is this sort of stuff here, which is countering saboteurs, countering irregular forces, countering special forces, which is a hard business. The other thing that we do is partnering with local police forces. Again, in Afghanistan, a core thing that we did. Okay, when I was in Afghanistan, they were out of battle space owners and combat arms, so they assigned us as battle space owners as well. But functionally, it meant that we partnered a lot with the local Afghan police forces to, take out the Taliban as best we could, and various drug networks and the Haqqani network and a bunch of other folks. So anyway, this is actually a core aspect of many countries' military police missions, is countering saboteurs and other threats. I don't understand the point of this. This is stupid for a couple reasons. First off, a straight checkpoint like this isn't a checkpoint. There is no barricade at all. If you have a checkpoint, even a crude barricade, for example, your own cars, can form what's called a serpentine. And this forces oncoming traffic to slow and slowly maneuver through these barricades. It allows the security element to stop the vehicle, it forces the vehicle to slow so they can visually inspect it for threats. It can prevent the vehicle from reaching a speed where it can run a barricade. It can allow, you could set up a serpentine in a way that has a search area, so you can peel them off, make them park somewhere else, again, ideally in a place with a lot of other barricades, and you can search that vehicle for contraband or for arms or whatever. So allowing a vehicle to, at full speed, drive straight down the road as far away from you as possible, and then you scare them by shooting into the air, I don't really understand what they think they're achieving. See, now this is a potentially good barricade, but again, in one, you can see here's the barricade, the vehicle that's on a run, that's attempting to run the barricade, but this had to pull out in front of it. But it was sort of a race against time. And if that driver was asleep or not paying attention or not that focused, or the vehicle just needed a second to turn over or took a minute to get it out of park, that vehicle will be long gone. That's, again, why you want a serpentine. It gives your team time to react. Also, I'm just going to say, it appears you also want to set up your checkpoint in an area where you can't easily be diverted, right? So where people can't see the checkpoint and turn off and suddenly avoid it. You want it to be obvious that they want to turn around and leave the checkpoint, right? And this is not that. You can see the vehicle can easily drive off to either side. It almost appears that there's another roadway, that this is a T intersection, and that they've established their barricade south of the intersection, which is not helpful. Okay, also, close your stupid doors, man. Remember, you think these people are alone, but they may not be. So, like, close the doors behind you.
Руки на капот! Наручники надевай.
Okay, one of the men got in through the front door. Listen, you don't want your suspects to enter through the driver's side door where your communications gear, your different gear is. They can really cause some problems. Also, they just arrested this dude. Normally, there's a process of search. You detect contraband, and then you consider detaining the person. If you're going to search them, you search them. There's a couple ways depending on the exact threat. You can pull them aside, have them sit on one side of the road while you search their vehicle away from them. You can also have them search the vehicle if you believe it may be rigged with explosives, or you can have a combination of the two, right? Where the person is detained by one of your personnel and the other person searches, but the person searching gets to ask questions. Is this is there anything in the glove box that's going to hurt me? Is this your cans of beer? What is in the trunk? What is this thing in the trunk? I want you to open the trunk. Yeah. People are like, it's bad role play. Guys, listen, if you claim that this is training, then do training, right? If this is a show, if this is a staged thing, then at least make it staged in a way that feels realistic. This is the classic Russian BTR move, right? The tiny portholes for you to shoot out of. Yeah, running a gun in your way out of an ambush, that's actually normal. This is not crazy at all. Also not totally wild. Yeah, being a support by fire or providing suppressive fire. This is serious suppression, by the way. Why you need to double fist these weapons doesn't make any sense because, again, you can see there are two sights. And while you're like, Paul, surely you have two eyes. No, you can look down one sight picture. And when it comes to, even though suppression isn't necessarily about like hitting the enemy, it's not about getting lethal rounds. Precision fires count for a lot. Yeah, clearing buildings, also fine training. Yeah, this is like normal. Sort of a weird stack, but if you've seen U.S. police do tactical training, this sometimes is par for the course. Oh, yeah, guys, if you're watching, yeah, please do. Thank you, Civil Defense, for pointing out. If you're watching, do hit the like button. It really helps us tell the algorithm that I'm making good content. And hit subscribe if you haven't already. I don't really understand what they think they're achieving. Moving through, I guess, a prepared trench to engage advancing forces, I suppose. Yeah, these are bizarre training events. But I understand that they need to show something. They need to show that they're busy and that they're prepared in the face of, excuse me, increasing an increasingly a public that doesn't believe they're capable of upholding the state, which is pretty problematic, honestly. It's pretty fraught for these guys. Anyway, that's really it for videos, guys. What questions do y'all have for me? I got a little time. What's up? Anybody? Anybody got some questions? Yeah. Yeah, the question is, could those guys have taken out and stood against Wagner? Probably not. Those MRAPs, like, they're pretty survivable. Like, don't get it twisted. All right, Kohler asks, logistical situation long-term for Russia, sustain their defense versus Ukraine's ability to sustain offensive operations. I mean, ultimately, when you talk about long-term warfare, you end up with some other, like the calculus starts to change. You look at who can sustain the larger, who can put more basically young men in the field at any one time, who can continue to equip them properly. Those are the sort of questions that you're left with, right? Those are questions you got to solve. Russia has some advantages. It has deep pockets of old Soviet gear. It has a really robust defense manufacturing sector. It has a large population and continual young men that it can employ, and an existing conscription system. Ukraine has also an existing conscription system, a smaller number of young men that it can continually employ, but it also has the advantage of support from NATO countries for its military logistics. That is not insignificant. So ultimately, I think at a lower intensity level, both sides could sustain a conflict indefinitely, as they sort of did in 2000, basically from 2014 till now. But if it were to continue at this level of intensity, I think that Russia, you start to answer political questions. Whose situation will become politically untenable first? The Russians or really NATO's willingness to support Ukraine? And I argue that probably Russia, actually, because if there's one thing we know about the U.S. public, it's that we forgot about Afghanistan the last 5 years of the war, and we were still spending mad money to support them. So if you understand that, then you understand that Russia may actually have the weaker political support for this war. So anyway, that's my answer. Jacob Andrew, we've seen Ukrainian soldiers with prosthetics come back to the front to help their colleagues. How will this help over time? I don't think that is a scalable event. Prostheses and amputation is it's very case by case. There are some people who can and want to go back. There are some people who can but don't want to. And there are many people who cannot. Because remember, injuries, especially combat injuries, are not often individual. They're not often single one-offs, right? Everybody likes those cases of like a person who like heals up 100% and they're good to go. But if you have been that close to an explosion, the chance of you being concussed, very high. Having oftentimes that severity of a concussion will have permanent symptoms, from hearing loss to memory issues to headaches. So, there's a lot of other compounding issues that can affect people. And I don't think it necessarily will scale like that. I don't think it'll be I don't think it'll be ever be enough to have a long-term impact on the war or manpower. Civil Defense asks, will NATO get drawn into this war? Not more than they already have. I think they've drawn their boundary. I don't think Russia has like greater designs. I think Russia's goal would be to achieve some level of its objectives in Ukraine, and then it would be done, and it would say, thank God that's over. So I don't think NATO will feel increasing threats from Russia. I think NATO's goal is to sustain its current level of involvement. Can I talk about the Dnipro crossing? Well, okay, there's been a lot of rumors, and I emphasize that these are rumors about Ukraine crossing the Dnipro. Here's the stance. Here's what's up. There's a lot of arguments and things that say that, oh, there's a lot of people are crossing the Antonovsky Bridge. There's a lot of fighting. There's a lot of... here's the thing. I've never seen any evidence that Ukrainian forces crossing the Antonovsky Bridge are doing so at any sort of scale. I think they are raids. They are intended to hit and withdraw. And I think they are done at a small enough scale that they are meant to tie down Russian forces across the Dnipro, but they are not meant to inflict serious casualties or pose a serious threat. So that's sort of my stance. I've never seen any evidence that they're moving brigade-size elements across the Dnipro, and they shouldn't. It's logistically too difficult. I mean, think about it. If you're a Russian commander, what are you going to do, man? You know these guys are going to cross here. What are you going to do? You're going to mine all these roads. You're going to mine all these areas that are canalized. You're going to target them with artillery. It's really tough. It's going to be a slog, brutal urban fight. It's just going to be absolutely vicious. And it's going to be so hard because every Ukrainian soldier that fights here is going to have to cross this narrow canal, right? Vero Fredis, thoughts on Hungary? I assume you mean Hungary or Hungry? I'm not that hungry. I ate before I started because I'm smart. I don't have actually, I don't know enough to weigh in intelligently on Hungary in this conflict specifically. Patrice, thank you for the $5 Canadian. All right, last chance for any other questions. Give you guys a couple minutes to weigh in, and then I am going to get on out of here. Last minute questions. Ger Olivares. It's a conspiracy theory. What role will Belarus play in the confrontation with NATO? You mentioned before they're increasing independence from Putin. It's true. I think they will probably continue to play their existing role. In some ways, they are trying to be more of a triangulator between Putin and other entities. They may try to be a mediator of sorts between Russia and other enemies. The more independent they appear, the more willing to trust them as a negotiator or broker other parties will be. So I think that may be the direction that they're trying to take things, which would be fascinating. I mean, Lukashenko, I was not expecting this level of political savvy from him to broker this deal between Prigozhin and Putin, especially at the last minute. But again, Lukashenko, who's thought of as kind of an impotent puppet, appeared to have operated with a high level of sophistication. Alexander Witter asks, what does Ukraine in NATO look like? Well, as a requisite for entering NATO, Ukraine has to have control of its sovereign territory. This is a problem because it doesn't. Because otherwise, think about it. If a country at war joins NATO, then, especially a country that doesn't control its entire territory, it would presumably instantly trigger Article 5. So a Ukraine in NATO presumably would either have a stable peace treaty with Russia and no longer have claims on territory or no longer be actively trying to exercise those claims, or it would have kicked Russia out fully. Civil Defense, thank you for the 4th of July whiskey contribution. I appreciate you. All right, guys. think that's all I'm going to do, actually. I think that's it for today. Thank you all so much for coming. Enjoy your 4th of July weekend if you're an American. If you're not, just enjoy I guess it's also the 4th of July for you. It's just not a holiday. But I hope you enjoy it, just because who doesn't enjoy their Saturday? Thank you guys a lot, and I will see you all in the next one.